Good evening. I'm Tony Jones. Welcome to a special edition of Q&A where we take a leap into the future and discuss the impact of technology on our jobs and on our lives. Here to answer your questions tonight, Ambassador for Mathematics and Science, Sydney University, Adam Spencer. Assistant Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Craig Laundy. Innovator and Director of the Sydney Business Insights, Sandra Peter. Scientist, entrepreneur and drone specialist, Catherine Ball, and Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy and the Future of Work, Ed Husic. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live across Australia on ABC TV, iView and News Radio at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Time. You can stream us around the world on YouTube, Facebook and Periscope. Well, there's plenty to talk about. Let's go straight to our first question. It's from Stella Hopkins.
I'm 13 years old. In 5 years, I'll hopefully be starting university. And in 10 years' time, I'll be looking for my first job. I'd like to ask the panel, what new jobs do you think there will be in 10 years? And what influence will robots and artificial intelligence have over the types of careers in the future?
Adam Spencer.
Sorry, Stella, it's all over. You missed it by that much. It's a fascinating issue, Tony, one that a lot of people have thought long and hard about. I think it's more complicated and nuanced than some of the statements you hear that the following industries simply won't exist or 80% of this will go. But there is no doubt at all that the digital revolution, robotics and AI will have massive impacts on employment. If it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, I'm not sure, but it will. The old argument you sometimes hear of, well, cars replaced horses and the world didn't stop, is bunk. I don't compare replacing a horse with a car that needs roads built for it, that brings up a transport, tourism industry that lets people get jobs done. That's nothing compared to a call centre of 600 people replaced by a single smart server. That sort of stuff will at some stage happen. The jury's out as to whether that means millions and millions of people never work again, but I think the potential impact is substantial. Talented young people like Stella, it depends what you want to do with yourself. If you want to be an actor or an artist, you're more likely to last long term than if you want to work in a call centre or something like that. Whatever you do maths at uni.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, yeah, briefly, advice. She's got a few years left. Where should she target?
We'll probably talk about this more later in the show, but whatever you do at university, add mathematics or computer coding onto it because mathematicians will build this century.
Sandra Peter.
And something else, right? STEM plus X is probably a new thing. But to go back a little bit to your question, and for the next few years, you'll keep hearing these scary statistics. 40% of our jobs are going to disappear, you know? That's been in Australia for quite a while now. You'll see statistics coming out of the UK. 80 million jobs will disappear in the US. 15 million jobs will disappear everywhere. There will be jobs. However, the more interesting way to think about this question is really to try to think about where, if we have these numbers in aggregate, are they telling us a story? And not really. We have to take this down to, well, what sectors are we looking at? How is this going to impact? What are the economics of the jobs that are already there? So if you're looking at something like, let's say, the law profession, right? How is that going to change if we introduce AI or machine learning? And we know that's coming, right? But we're not sure how the law industry will change because, you know, we could change some of the jobs in the law.
Sandra, I'm going to interrupt you there because we've actually got a question coming up on that very subject. But can you talk about scary statistics, and I heard one of your podcasts with one of your own analysts with some very scary statistics for Australia. That is to say, he said all of the jobs pretty much in the mining industry will go, and most of the jobs in the agricultural sector will go due to automation within the next 10 to 15 years. Now, that's a scary statistic for Australians.
That is a scary statistic. So my second point there was going to be you have to look at where these jobs are disappearing. So one of the industries, if you don't look at the number in the aggregate, is indeed the mining and the agricultural industry. So what happens if, and we know we're automating these jobs. Already in Australia, we're far ahead of anybody else. If you're flying into Sydney, you can look at Botany Bay and you can see the ports. Everything there is automated. So if you're looking at those sorts of things, what are the impacts of that? First, there's some risks around real polarization of society. So if these jobs are disappearing in the rural areas, what will happen there if we can run the mines out of Perth or we can run the same mines out of Bangalore? And indeed,
you mean have the operations centre for the automated mines could be anywhere? Could be in Perth or India.
Anywhere in the world. The same thing is probably coming to agricultural jobs in Australia. We can automate a lot of the jobs that we used to do before. And we're not that good at picking fruit at the moment, but we're getting better in these areas. So if those jobs are disappearing, we're going to have, first of all, a geographic polarization. And you mentioned Hugh Durrant-White, who's now the chief defence scientist of the UK, talking about these jobs. And he would know a thing or two because he's automated most of those jobs himself, right? But then you have to look at what's happening in the cities, where you might get a different polarization of jobs. So what's happening, and we have some numbers coming out of The Economist over the past 20 years, coming out of the US as well, and we're seeing that we're automating the jobs in the middle. So routine jobs, routine cognitive jobs are being automated and routine manual jobs are being automated. So you'll get a lot of people in the services industry. You'll get more of us are having gardeners, are having people doing our laundry, are having people cleaning our houses. So you'll get a lot of those jobs. You'll also get the very creative, very interesting jobs that we're all hoping for. But we're automating a lot of the jobs that are about analyzing things, credit card statements or shopping habits or other things. So that comes with a huge risk of polarising the society and a huge social cost that we need to
OK,
face.
we'll come back to you. And Catherine, are you full of optimism? I mean,
yes.
Your view is that drones are going to be sort of hovering over all of our heads and that'll solve all our problems.
Well, I'd actually like to take the discussion that we've just had just to a different frame in that, Stella, this isn't about jobs, this is actually about skills. And so what we need to identify are the skills that are going to be needed into the future. And of course, coding, I think, is absolutely going to be a key skill. If you can code, if you can write COBOL, for example, where we have a national shortage and we use that through pretty much all of our banking and military systems, you're going to pretty much be guaranteed a job. Coding is the new learning French or something like that, right? It's a new language. So you don't have to be interested in STEM to get involved with coding. But this idea of skills rather than actual jobs. And so the World Economic Forum, you know, both in 2015 and 2020, they predicted we will need complex problem-solving skills. Now, robots are very good at doing the mundane, but they're not very good at thinking outside the square. They're not very good at being creative. And so my advice to you would be keep your experiences and your life experiences broad. Travel, travel, travel. Go and meet as many different kinds of people as you possibly can. Make sure you've got a balance between some STEM or some coding as well as some creative thinking. I have a feeling that the degrees that I was offered in 1998 are going to be very different to the degree courses that you're going to be offered going forwards. So keep your mind more on the skills and more on the heart and the gut that you have, as well as your innate, abilities, and really focus down on those.
All right, let's hear from our politicians. I've kept them out until now. Ed Husic.
Very good.
And look how well behaved we've been. I think this is an important conversation to have. I know that the needle will move relatively quickly from awe to anxiety with technology, and we always have to be very careful about that. But it's important that we think about this. And when Stella raises her question, you look at the Foundation for Young Australians saying that 6 out of 10 of your fellow students are possibly training up for jobs that'll be radically affected by technology. So when I say it's important that we have this conversation, it's important, one, to know this is likely to happen, and two, what do we do in terms of transition, change, helping people on that way through? For example, talking about not necessarily training for work per se, but having that skill set that Catherine was talking about, and seeing what schools are doing in this space as well. Like I went to Quakers Hill Public a few weeks ago, out in my neck of the woods, that are teaching kids all about coding and about technology. And it wasn't the coding per se that stood out for me. What stood out was young students working in teams, solving problems, thinking creatively about things that they thought they could never get off the ground. It's these type of attributes, skills, traits that are really going to stand people in good stead in the years to come, and will ensure that they'll be able to be mobile between jobs.
Craig Laundy.
Yes, Stella, the latest statistics show us a little bit of what everyone said. You'll have, people leaving school today will have on average 17 jobs in their lifetime and 5 careers. And this goes, I think, to the point Catherine was making. University ain't going to be like it is today moving forward. This fixed 3 and 5 year historic trend, you are going to see the rise of reskilling and looking at lifelong learning in your career. Micro-credentials, which are very common in the US, training you or adapting the skills you have up to that point and targeting them at another problem. And this is going to change the nature of how our education system works as well, and I'm sure we'll touch on that more tonight. The other thing is that in the comments from Sandra about mining and agriculture, 2.5% or 2.3% of the jobs in this country are in agriculture, 9% in mining. 80% are in the service sector. So things like aged care, disability support, which you hear us say a lot about, when that's pumped out the NDIS, $22 billion a year. You know, complementary technology like exoskeletons, where humans will be in them, enabling, and this comes out of the defence space back into industry, enabling them to perform tasks that are subhuman. You know, so that are above and beyond our natural abilities. And the integration of the individual and the machine, it's not just the machine doing everything. And, you know, the imagination of our entrepreneurs, and this is the thing, over the last 12 months, you hear all this doom and gloom. 307,000 jobs were created in this economy. There are more Australians today working than at any other time in our country's history. It's about aiming you in the right spot, and if that spot closes, the door closes, redirecting you to one that's opening up for you to
a quick one, Craig. Are you suggesting that it won't matter if there are no jobs in agriculture or mining?
There will be. Like the call centre, because it's the flow on, it's the multiplier effect. Building those call centres in Perth, you've got technicians servicing the equipment. You've got the software designers designing the software. You're patenting that and selling it worldwide. We are, the growth centre that we have, we've identified, the METS growth, mining engineering technology. We have a unique opportunity in this country to export our nous around the world, and that will create jobs here.
OK, let's move on to an area you wouldn't imagine that jobs might be under threat from automation. Let's hear from Laura DeFater, I beg your pardon.
As a law student at Sydney University, I'm particularly concerned that the roles of legal researchers and solicitors could one day be replaced by robots. Given the government has a bad record in successfully transitioning workers out of roles that have become automated, how will it ensure that university students, like me, are employable in a workplace inevitably dominated by the rise of artificial intelligence?
Let me go to Sandra first, and then I'll hear from Adam. But Sandra, I cut you off talking about this earlier, but the idea that lawyers could be automated, or that many of the tasks done by solicitors and others could be automated, done by artificial intelligence, must send a bit of a shockwave through graduates as they head off to become lawyers.
I'd start with can be doesn't mean they will be, right? Can be, yes, we can automate some of the law jobs. We can automate discovery. We can automate the way we go through large amounts of documents. JP Morgan recently went through about 350,000 hours of work looking through contracts, through commercial contracts in 1 second. Yes, we can actually do that. And we probably will do that. But that's a small part of the law industry. So what I'd be looking at if I were you is, first, what does the law industry work like? How does it work, right? Lawyers are paid by the hour. They work in partnerships. There's no real incentive within the law industry to automate anything other than that, and no real capability at the moment to automate anything other than that. So yes, disruption might come from Silicon Valley or from outside the law industry, but it doesn't mean that it's here. What I'd look at if I were you is two things. One is, what are the pathways through the law industry? Because junior lawyers like yourselves would get into the law industry and get into law and then participate in big programs and be part of a group learning the craft. That's going to change. We have no idea yet how that's going to change. Second, in universities, we give you a broad range of skills that are applicable in many different ways. We don't teach you a specific set of skills. We give you a deep grounding in something, but then a whole range of other skills that will help you move through that profession.
I was going to quickly go back to Laura. Is the university and your faculty, your law faculty, are they warning you about the kind of realities you're going to face as you come out?
I haven't particularly noticed that. It's just with the fear of artificial intelligence rising, we can see so many jobs are already dominated by this. Obviously, it's going to come for my sector as well.
Adam, what do you think about that? It isn't only lawyers, actually. It's a finance industry.
There's a whole host of them, Tony. There was the great example of Watson, that machine they taught to play Jeopardy in the United States that came in and beat all the human champions in the history of Jeopardy. They asked Watson this one great question, and it was a dessert insult. And all the humans are looking at each other going, and Watson goes, what is a meringue harangue? It was a rhyming dessert insult. And Watson went, meringue harangue. And the two smartest guys in the history of Jeopardy went nowhere near getting it. Machines can't quite yet read with the fluency and the subtlety of a trained human, but they can read millions of times as fast. Watson's not smart, but Watson just read everything on Wikipedia. Everything. And built up an alternative intelligence that was far faster than any human being. People who
But not actually you.
No, they're very flattering. People who work in robo-finance, for example, in finance, robo-finance models now can offer better financial advice, faster financial advice, can upsell people on the phone to higher products better than humans can, because at 4:30 in the afternoon, Watson's not going, I could murder a beer, I'm over this. Those machines are getting better and faster. I'm genuinely, I take a dimmer view on the potential for future employment in things like finance, law, etc., than Sandra does. I think you'll see thousands of jobs go in those fields.
Catherine,
I'm going to disagree with that.
Right.
There's jobs that are going to be created, all these new technologies that are coming in. So, for example, with the drone industry, we've got drone lawyers, we've got drone legislation, we've got international drone legislation, we've got all of these things that are building around
But you need lawyers to work out what happens if drones fall out of the sky.
Well, you need the human influence, right? So, like I said earlier, robots and things are very great at going and mining all of this data, but the only reason why Gary Kasparov lost to that one Deep Blue was because he taught it, because he played with it, you know, and so he taught it all of his secrets. And so the thing is, humans still need, at times when they take legal advice, you know, if it's during a time of divorce or if it's during a time of a business transaction, they want to trust that person that they're talking to. And so I still feel that there's a huge human factor to be played in the legal industry, and my advice to you might be to actually, in your finals or when you're looking at specialising, take a look at the STEM fields and the tech fields and what that might actually mean in terms of some of the legal requirements we don't yet have in place. So see this as an opportunity and a challenge rather than a complete...
But just quickly there, Catherine, 15 years later, I downloaded a chess-playing app onto my phone for $9.95 that will beat any human who ever lives. Just no human will ever get near that. It would have crushed Kasparov, would have crushed Deep Blue. In the space of 15 years, you went from a state-of-the-art, once-ever computer super project to a minor app on my phone for which I got change for $10. And 15 years from now, you'll have jumped that far forward and that far forward again. And I don't accept that all the people who get displaced by that will just get jobs cleaning robots.
And I was going to say too, the other issue is that, you know, despite the fact that, you know, it'll create new demand for new legal services, the issue in the case that Laura raises is that a lot of the stuff that is used as the threshold, as the step into law, the discovery, you know, working on discovery, the paralegals that go in there and get their training by combing through all those documents, that now that process gets automated. The question is, well, what's the new entry point in for them? And this is why, you know, thinking about these things in advance is important rather than trying to clamour at the last moment to find a solution. We need to think longer term by having the question raised and then applying thought to, OK, well, if that pathway into law no longer exists, what's going to be the new pathway?
We'll start with the High Court challenges on who's Australian in our...
Oh, there's so many.
I'm definitely...
And the other thing is, too, we can't lose lawyer jokes. We have to come up with...
My mum's a lawyer. It's all right. One question.
Some of my best friends are lawyers.
Did you read the terms and conditions on that app before you downloaded it? Because a human being wrote those terms and conditions. I'm sorry. There is still going to be human factors around any kind of automation or robotisation.
Craig wants to jump in, but I'm going to go to the next question first because it does point to him and to government, the role of governments, from Carolyn Mee.
I'm the founder of a disruptive technology business, so I appreciate the value of technology. But I'm also the daughter of a taxi owner. While the taxi industry was overdue for disruption and technology was well placed to deliver on that disruption, does the government have a role to play in some way to oversee that transition from the incumbent business models to digitally disruptive solutions?
Now, Craig.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah.
You have a role.
Yeah, and that was... look, obviously taxis are a state-based legislative authority and they came up with a scheme to transition people across. But what has actually happened in that process as well, with the introduction of Uber, is what we're actually talking about here. You know, I actually still use taxis because the taxi app that is now there, which wasn't there before, is absolutely spectacular. And, you know, they've been forced to compete. So the government had the role of, yes, doing the transitioning, but then they had to pull up their socks in the market and compete or face losing. I mean, there's also a lot of technology that's coming our way. Now, we are a country of some 24 million people. With good, stable democracy. And Laura, I'll go back to your question, how government handles, you know, automation. You know, you've heard about the death knell of the manufacturing industry in Australia. In the last 12 months, 15,200 net jobs were created in manufacturing, 6,700 in Victoria and 3,500 in South Australia, where the automotive industry is closed or in the process of finishing up. What we need to be is smart. And fintech, I think, and Laura, again, blockchain. Blockchain is going to massively disrupt the legal profession. New platforms, OK? That's a bigger issue for you than artificial intelligence, in my humble opinion. However, we need to be, as a government, you know, very smart about how we regulate. And it needs to be light touch. In fact, I would argue that with 24 million people here, we are the perfect test bed for the world's technology. We could be a sandbox, they call it, and let overseas companies come here, play and innovate. But we can only do that if we've got, as Ed said, a good vision of what's on the horizon, not just now, but what's coming at us. And it's not to be feared, Laura, OK? It's to be embraced, because as one door closes, as I said to Stella, another will open. And you're right, sitting off the back of blockchain, you know, and you tell me, if a property exchanges tomorrow, 2 solicitors will walk across town holding a bank cheque and a signed front page of a contract. It's been happening that way for hundreds of years. It's ripe for disruption. However, off the back of blockchain, and you know what? There'll be cheaper bills for customers. The businesses won't pay as much to the lawyer. They'll have more profit, they'll grow and they'll employ more people.
So, Craig, the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter referred to this as creative destruction. And his view was that this is what capitalism's all about. It will destroy those parts of itself which are no longer useful and invent new things, and governments should stay out of it completely. Are you that much of a purist?
It'll add... I wouldn't say destroy, it will add efficiencies. OK, but... And yes, I'm not completely out of it, because you always will have moral and ethical issues that you need to consider, especially with the rise of big data, which I'm sure, again, we'll talk about tonight, and digital identity, which is a piece that we need to get right. You know, and people are naturally cautious. The word trust you hear, and I hope we hear it a lot tonight. You have to trust the systems that are used, and regulators need to ensure that there is confidence in the system, but they need to do it in a way that doesn't stifle innovation.
Also, I was just going to say, can I just take the contrarian view? And the initial focus was on government coming in. But in this country, we do have an issue where smaller businesses and bigger businesses take their time to embrace, you know, in terms of digital engagement. And the classic is the arrival of Amazon. We've got all these retailers saying that Amazon coming is going to decimate retail in this country. Yet for years, we've known Australian consumers prefer online platforms for, you know, shopping and for a whole lot of other services. Very little done. Bigger businesses, some of the studies that have been done when they've compared listed Australian companies versus overseas rivals, 9% are investing in technology and automation in Australia, 25% in Switzerland. And then what happens when an Amazon comes, everyone's going, what are we going to do, government, about this? What regulation, what legal changes are we going to put in place? In terms of Uber, how long had we been waiting for changes in service within the taxi industry using technology that was around? There is a equal opportunity here for business to get digitally engaged, to think about the way that they use technology, and to not... And again, this is a big thing that I've got here, and it's not pointing the finger at business, but the big thing that I'm genuinely worried about is that we scramble for a response. That we know this stuff's coming, we know that we can use technology better, and what we do is we wait until the very last moment, and then we have to switch to government to step in to sort out the regulations. When it really could be a two-way, the way in which business and government can work together can actually do better for the community.
Catherine, you're in the business side of the equation, so what do you think about government intervention here to smooth the path?
They always say that, you know, regulation lags behind invention, and in fact, I think it's a huge problem. I think we need to actually get a lot faster, a lot smarter. And I don't know whether that means you have to disrupt in and the way the processes they work. In business, the people that I've seen, the big companies, you know, everyone thinks, you know, Rome's too big to fall, but some of the big banks and the big companies are really at risk if they don't get up to speed. The way they do it is by reducing their risk platform, by ring-fencing opportunities. And I've never actually seen that really done inside a government framework. The closest thing I've seen to that is the Advanced Queensland programme that we have in the Queensland State Government. government, which is $400 million going directly into creating startups, then going from startup to started up to scaled up. And they've got a 4-year plan, and they had the finances all organised, and they knew what they wanted to achieve. We have a Queensland chief entrepreneur, for example, Mark Sowerby, who's now handing over to Steve Baxter. These are people who understand the tech, they understand the human, they have been investing in this stuff for decades, and they've seen their own successes, and they know how it works. Those people don't have enough of a voice, I think, outside I've seen at the state level. I don't know any other state or territory in Australia that has a chief entrepreneur. We should all have a chief entrepreneur. We should have a national chief entrepreneur. We need to really start working out where we can maximise the benefits between that academic, business and government, that beautiful triumvirate, and I just haven't seen that working anywhere quite yet.
Tony, can I just be re-contrarian to Ed's contrarian?
Sure.
Don't get me wrong, Schumpeter is probably my favourite of all Austrian economists, but one thing that strikes me is sometimes things that come along and jazz things up a bit and are great for consumers are automatically thought to be disruption and therefore good. Public holiday today where I was walking around, and literally half the things I saw on the road were guys and girls on push bikes ferrying around food to people. Now, as a consumer, that's awesome. Ring from home, boom, it arrives. I'm not sure that you're not creating an underclass of people who aren't earning much money, not necessarily working fantastic condition. That's where there is a role for government. Absolutely. Just because it comes in and it's fantastic for consumers doesn't necessarily mean it's disruptive, and I'm not saying it is the case in those food deliveries, but sometimes things that people look at and go, wow, what amazing disruption, is something that's just found its way through the regulatory loopholes and sits there for a while until we catch up. So there is definitely a role for government in ensuring that exploitation's not happening.
Yeah. Sandra, this is your point, I think, earlier when you were talking about the polarisation that will and definitely occur. How do you stop this happening where you have this educated class who have access to the technology and are working creatively with it, and then you have everyone else underneath working in the service economies, delivering food to those people, etc.?
Well, first thing
or cleaning their houses or taking care of their grandparents.
So we know quite often that when technology comes, it does come with the social costs. And what you've described here is exactly that polarisation that I was talking about. People with very creative, very well-paid jobs and people in the service economy. So first, we need to understand that this is not inevitable. This is not something that is just coming and there's nothing we can do about it. We have a role to play in this. Large organisations, entrepreneurs, government, all of us have a role to play. And we will decide whether we choose to replace those people with technology or not. I think quite often we tend to think that these people, you know, they're coming for us and they will get us. But, you know, in industry, we choose if we want to replace labour with capital. That is a choice we make. We make a choice whether we want to profit maximise and put all these people out of business or whether we want machines to work together with humans. If we design on autonomous vehicles, we can design it with a steering wheel or without, and that is a conscious choice that we make about whether we want people in this or not.
OK, I'm going to move on. You're watching a special edition of Q&A on the future, and next question comes from Charles Jamison.
The skill of coding is often conflated with the entire field of computer science. Computer science research, like Catherine's, for instance, develops new technologies and new algorithms to help the world. But coding by itself, it's really just the skill of writing code. It's a vocational skill, like using Excel spreadsheets. Our schools have decided to introduce coding into their curriculums, but computer science plays a much smaller role. What do you think we should be teaching to our students if we are to prepare them for a technological future? OK,
I'm going to start with Adam. And can you just explain for those people out there who don't know exactly what coding is, briefly what it is, before you answer?
OK, so a couple of years ago, I think it was the Gillard government came out with a plan of let's get every kid in high school speaking an Asian language. There were 4 Asian languages. Silly idea. It's never going to happen. There's not enough teachers. We're already blessed with a lot of people who speak foreign language in Australia. And my phone will have me fluent in every language on earth within a decade. I'll be talking to someone overseas and they'll just be hearing it in their language and I'll be hearing it back in mine. We don't need to teach kids French or Hindi or Mandarin. We need to teach kids the language that facilitates that sort of technology. And coding is a part of that. So initially coding was just zeros and ones controlling the information that was going through the gates on computer chips. Steve Wozniak wrote the original Apple code, for example, 40 years ago, a series of zeros and ones in which no one has ever found a single mistake. It's the Mona Lisa of nerdery. It is just one of the most beautiful human creations ever. Now that we've got more sophisticated, there are languages laying above the zeros and the ones. You have different sort of... People might remember learning at high school, you know, if n is even, then n becomes 3n plus 1. Basic English languages like that. And then there's now a series of different languages out there in which you can instruct computers to do things. Different languages might favour graphic design or financial analysis, but the coding is the language with which you write the computer programs. You're right, Todd, that you need more than just to understand the basics of code. It needs to be then integrated into computer programming, app design and things like that. But I don't see any point in kids studying Latin anymore in school.
Let me just let's go to quickly before I go to the rest of the panel and even back to you. I just want to hear from Charles. Now, I know you're in the Australian team for the International Computing Olympiad in Iran, of all places.
Word!
Now, may have had your round of applause. Here's the question.
Does he get a tracksuit?
Are you actually saying that you believe your special subject is sort of being dumbed down in schools?
Well, I think coding by itself, I see it a lot like handwriting. So we teach handwriting in, you know, year 1, year 2, but then by the time we get to high school, it's really just the tool we use to express ourselves and to make arguments and to write creative stories. I think it's the same thing with coding, where the coding itself is not really important. It's the ideas we make and it's the algorithms we can create and how we can talk to the computer that's important. So I think
you can't write a poem before you can spell, so we need coding, upon which then I agree on top we need to layer programming and design and problem solving and algorithms and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in our school curriculums at the moment, it stops there. It stops at the handwriting. It doesn't really get on to that really sophisticated stuff which the world, all our new innovations are based on.
OK, so Sandra, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say, yes, I think it's absolutely important that we teach coding, or at least we teach people the basics of it and how to understand that. If, you know, blockchain is going to change everything, and it hasn't yet. It's coming, it will cure cancer, it will give us world peace. But before we get there, yes, we need people who understand the technology behind blockchain, but we need people who create the business models, who figure out how to take blockchain, that is a technology that can be applied from everything to power grids to, I don't know, trade finance, to a whole variety of fields. We need those people as well, and we need people who understand both. Furthermore, whenever we develop this technology, we also need the people who can bring empathy, who can bring creativity, who can bring imagination. And one of the really good examples is not just about how good you make the algorithm or how good you make the technology. People who invented MRI machines, yes, really cool technology, lots of programming that goes into it, lots of science, lots of STEM that goes into it. And then we put them in hospitals, and then we realize that about 80% of the kids that go into these MRI machines have to be sedated because it's big and it's scary, it makes a loud noise, and you have to still sit really still in it. So then you need other people who come in and figure out, well, how can we make this technology? What can we do? And it's not a STEM problem. It's a creativity, it's an empathy problem. It's people who talk to kids and then put decals all over these MRI machines and make it into an adventure, you know. There's a little boat and it all looks like a jungle and there are little fish, and if you sit really quiet in the machine, you know, the little fish start jumping around, or the pirates come about. Right? These people, it has nothing to do with technology quite often. Lego reinvented itself in 2008, right? And if you looked at the data and the science behind it, it said, well, only boys play with Lego. 85 or 87% of Lego players are boys, so girls just do not play with that. That is not a science problem. That's an imagination problem. How do I get girls to play with it? How do I imagine a new world where this exists and they collaborate and you have Lego for girls?
Catherine, how do you get girls into coding? That's an obvious segue.
Well, I think that with every new technology, you need to have diversity because it all comes down to the ability to think about things differently. And this is where I'm actually going to come in defence of all the language teachers in the country. Learning a different language is great for your brain.
Yes.
And so actually one of the biggest problems isn't going to be that you're going to be able to understand a language. It's going to understand cultural references. How am I going to understand the difference of a culture if I've never been to that country, seen it spoken, learn a few words, tried a bit of the food? So the language itself is just part of a very deep and visceral human experience. And so I would hate for language teachers around the world to suddenly think, well, there's no point anymore. There is still a point to learn how to speak French, how to code in COBOL, how to, you know, talk and embrace ourselves. As we become a more connected global society, we need to start listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And I think that's where technology technology can take some of the weight off our shoulders in terms of the, the under-churning of the machines. But that beautiful human relationship that you get from having a go at someone's foreign language, you just can't replace that with an automatic translator that you'd see on Star Trek.
OK, but brief answers from our politicians. Ed, I just want to ask you this. No, I didn't mean that in...
We don't do those.
Yeah.
I was going to say, is that
generally
possible?
don't, but we've got a lot of totally get that. So Ed, and I'll throw the same to Craig as well.
Now, give him a harder one.
Should coding be part of our school curricula in the same way that English and mathematics is now?
Well, I mean, in some countries like the UK, they've made it something that has, for primary school students, is something that is embraced and is taught. And I mean, there's a whole debate about how long coding will last and the rise of AI and machine learning and software development going and being affected by that. But I come back to the point I said earlier about, it's not just about the coding, it's about the way in which you're encouraging young students to engage with technology, to think about it. I mean, coding opens up that pathway in the minds of young students, and being able to also think creatively. Some of the things that you were saying earlier about, thinking about how you can use technology in a particular way and to, overcome some of the... It's not just about the tech, it's about the way that people relate to the tech as well. And, I think governments have taken a little bit too long. In New South Wales, it took well over time to get the digital technologies curriculum endorsed by the Board of Studies and rolled out in New South Wales. Way too long. This should be done way faster. So I think in some cases we can do way better than what we currently are.
And Craig?
Well, first, Charles, the important question, do you get an Australian tracksuit?
No, I asked that question first.
Did.
Did you?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
he
did.
did.
I asked about the
Consensus.
5 minutes.
Do you get ones and twos, like a suit and the whole lot?
That's a blazer.
Blazer.
A blazer, how cool is
Blazer.
that? Good on you, mate, congratulations. Look, I said earlier, and the first question is Stella, education as we know it is absolutely ripe for disruption as well, and the structure of it. It's not just coding. I mean, in the innovation science agenda, we now have 880-odd early learning centres engaging with coding. 1,800 early learning teachers have done coding seminars to teach in those schools, starting from that age in early learning. So, and where it goes, the other piece of the puzzle, and I think this comes a little bit to what Catherine was saying, the other thing that I think needs to be in our curriculum is entrepreneurial flair. We teach economics and commerce in isolation, but all this put together, I mean, for you, Charles, to grab your computer science course and go off and ultimately provide Stella with a job, you need to have entrepreneurial nous and flair. And that's a cultural change we need to make. And we shouldn't be scared of teaching that in schools, because risk takers, investors, and this is going, I think, to Ed's point earlier, industry-led disruption will create profitability and jobs. Sound familiar?
Can I say quickly, Tony, I think Java is a far sexier language than French, but that's just me.
OK, now we are planning another big event soon, our second high school special to be broadcast live from our ABC Sydney studios on Monday the 6th of November. If you remember the one in Melbourne, you'd be really looking forward to this one. And we're looking for senior high school students who are keen to tackle the big issues to join the Q&A panel. To be considered, send us a 1-minute video audition. The details are on our website if you'd like to do that. If you've already sent us a video, no need to resubmit. Entries close on the 16th of October. Now, our next question comes from Jess Lucas.
Why are drones seen as such a hope for the future? It feels right now like the military and some oddball retailers are really driving it right now. But how is it going to affect me as an individual Australian? Are we really going to get mattresses delivered to me in the CBD of Sydney anytime soon? Really?
Yeah, Catherine.
Oh, this is my PR problem. Thank you, Jess. Yeah. It's I don't work on any of the military side of drone technology, though it's an incredibly fascinating field to watch it go, and swarming is apparently the new buzzword, excuse the joke there, about drone technology. How you will actually experience drones actually depends on how you want to experience drones, and also whether you actually need to experience them. Most of our police services now around the country, most of our fireys are also looking at using drones. We have people that are looking at delivering blood. If you've had a car accident, so you get your blood type right there at the roadside. We've got people looking even at, in fact, people across the world are already doing this. But looking at an accident, taking something in 3D, walking back through it as a judge in the courtroom. You're going back to the legal thing again. This kind of data is going to be put in there. Selfie wearable drones are a thing that's coming. So it's either going to be a watch kind of selfie wearable, or it'll be like a little brooch or something like that. So no more selfie sticks. Drone ambulances. There's the chap in New Zealand that invented the drone ambulance jetpack. He can't build them fast enough for him selling them. So, and drones as well, don't forget, swim, they crawl, they drive. So we've got drones that are operating across the Great Barrier Reef at the moment, killing crown of thorns starfish. We have, the idea of smarter vehicles or smarter access. I don't think a mattress is the perfect kind of thing to be delivering with a drone. But Amazon, for example, Amazon, for example, when we try and encourage people into our sandpit, Amazon's an absolute target for us because Google have been over here again with their Project Wing. Google were here in 2012 delivering dog snacks. This idea of delivery drones, apparently Uber have an ice cream delivery drone. So as a pregnant woman, I find that quite an attractive prospect. But, it's this idea of,
What's so great on a hot summer's day?
Well, if it's completely refrigerated, straight in the mouth,
refrigerated,
be lovely, wouldn't it?
So a thing the size of a refrigerator hovering over your child.
A little cat, yes. But the question, it's a very good question.
What could possibly go wrong?
You're a glass half full kind of guy, Tony.
The other day I saw there was a flame-throwing drone that was burning rubbish off a high-voltage power line in China, because nothing's ever going to go wrong with that, right?
No, not at all.
But hanging out of a helicopter, picking litter off of a power line is quite a dangerous job. So we've actually got drones now that are working in our most difficult and dangerous conditions. We've got amazing Indigenous ranger organisations working across the country using drones to monitor the health of the Great Barrier Reef and of our beautiful natural heritage that we have here in Australia, recording culture, and being able to spread a message about what Australia is to people who live in, say, New York. There's even a company in the Rockies that actually you could, if you're bored at your lunch break for 10 minutes, pop on your virtual reality headset, literally fly a drone around the Rockies in real life and land it back on its landing pad. And you'd have been and experienced a part of the world that you've never experienced before. So drones aren't just about, the military aspects, and they're not just about the gee-wizardry aspects. I think here in Australia, the place and the time for drones to really come into their own is in that emergency.
Can I just ask you the obvious question, Catherine? how does someone become, and a woman actually even more extraordinary, because most of the drone pilots are men, as far as I understand it.
99%.
99%. 99%. So how does a woman become an evangelist for drones? How did that happen?
Well, I never really care about... It's funny, I wax lyrical about drones, but for me, it's unleash the flying monkeys. What I really care about is the data, or the way we're able to use those to make the world a better place. So some of the programmes that I was working on back in 2015, we were doing reconnaissance, looking at endangered turtle colonies, 300 or 400 k's from where we launched it off the coast of Western Australia, world-first programme. And we were able to actually rebuild and look at how turtle rookeries and how turtles were behaving without putting scientists at risk and out in the field. That was a world-first for Australia. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that project, but there's many other ways that when I saw the data coming off those drones, it was something that would make David Attenborough cry. It was Mother Nature undisturbed. And as an ecologist, we have this thing called sampling bias. And what we want to do is we want to sample the natural world without having an effect on it. And so how can we do that when there's clouds in the way of satellites, when manned aircraft haven't got enough fuel in their tanks to get out there? You can send out the drones. But the next big thing now is humanitarian response. So after Cyclone Debbie, one of the first things we put up were drones to have a look to see what power lines were down, what roads were open, how the erosion had happened on the things. We now have them right now flying in New South Wales looking at shark detection. So this summer there will be people whose lives will be saved because someone has seen a shark coming in or someone has seen someone drowning and they have reacted appropriately. A very good friend of mine, Jackie, also developed a shark alarm on her drone. So not only does it see the shark, it will actually tell you to get out of the water. So there are drones for good, and there are real ways in which we can use these platform technologies for good. And it's about making sure we have those human factors, those human moralities and human ethics around how we apply this technology.
OK, I'm going to quickly jump to another form of new technology. Sort of. It's from Arthur Lith.
This topic asked us to imagine being dropped off at the supermarket by your driverless car, which then drives off to park itself, and then is summoned by smartphone to pick you up. Does this mean that I can take my 1-year-old son in his crib, put him in the back seat of my driverless car, and send the car off across town so he can spend some time with his grandparents.
Adam, driverless cars. It raises the whole topic. I mean, you can address the grandchildren issue if you like, but more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, driverless cars is fascinating, and you do hear some people again say that, look, we're about 2 minutes away from having every single car on every road in the world being driverless. That's not going to happen. It is a slow creep. You look at the average age of a car on the Australian roads, about 10 years old. So but there will certainly be a time in Australia when the vast bulk of vehicles, and especially in certain traffic corridors and doing certain jobs, will be driverless. Now, that scares some people, the idea of seating over to the machine, but if you're that bogan who was tailgating me on the M1 the other day in Sydney, I would so much prefer that car had been driverless. I watch now with an idea to driverless cars in the future. I watch the way people drive on our roads.
Isn't this the problem, Adam, that some cars will be driverless and some will have that guy sitting in them and they'll be able to cut in and out of the driverless cars, which will have to brake suddenly, shaking up the people inside them?
Which will have, the driverless cars will have a video that will record that person doing that. The fact that the driverless car has had to brake at that speed will be recorded, and that person will be taken off the roads considerably more likely in that environment than in the current environment where people just drive around like maniacs all the time. It's going to revolutionise the way that people transport themselves. It's going to change the way the traffic flow happens, congestion and the like, the way that our systems congest so quickly because they're designed by the human frailty of human drivers. You don't need to spend tens of billions of dollars on new motorways if the cars using those motorways are using them intelligently and optimally.
OK, Sandra, I know your futurologists are much more sceptical about driverless cars. In fact, I heard one of your guys say that in his lifetime you won't see a driverless taxi in Sydney.
Yes, I think we need to distinguish, and you've said driverless cars, so I think you really shouldn't worry at this point about driverless cars. And we've heard Theodore White again said not in his lifetime. We've spoken to people like Carlos Ghosn, who's the CEO of Nissan, Renault and Mitsubishi, who said, yeah, we figured out 98%, but the 2% we haven't figured out, that's really hard. And to go to your point, I think there's a few issues here, and first one is really around the technology, what you've mentioned. So we figured out how to make them work really under optimal conditions and on really good roads. And I would ask how many of our Sydney roads are good enough for those driverless cars and under perfect conditions. Now, what happens is that we come in there. And, you know, if I drive, the driverless car has to pick up the fact that I'm winking or that I'm waving him in. That's not happening yet. Or they have to figure out the fact that they sometimes can break the law a little bit in order to be safe. And Carlos was giving this example of, he's from Brazil. In Rio, if you're driving after 11 o'clock at night, you better run that red light because if you stop, someone's going to rob you. Now, we need driverless cars who will know, well, it's around 11:05, but it kind of looks safe.
Don't put the baby in that car, Arthur.
Yeah, exactly.
I would not put the baby in that car, right? And there are the technical issues, and LiDAR is still very expensive, and we only have a few companies making it, so there are all these issues. And then there are the economics of driverless cars. We haven't yet figured out how to do insurance around these things and who's going to insure them, who's going to finance them. We haven't figured out who's going to take responsibility for some of these things that are happening. The car industry is now built in relationships with dealers that have to service the cars and so on. How will that work if we have driverless cars? And so economic considerations, technical considerations, and then I would bring in the ethical ones, and we really haven't figured those ones out. So interestingly, Volvo said that they will ensure they will pay for anything that happens in their driverless car. Mercedes has come out really last week at one of the big car conferences and said, actually, we're going to protect the driver and, you know, whatever else happens. And smart people are trying to figure out how this works because places like MIT, right? We have a project out of MIT that is looking at, well, who should die, basically, in the case of driverless car? Let's say I'm driving down the road, little child runs in front of the car, and, you know, should the car kill me and drive me into a pole, or should it save the child? Luckily, the child pretty much all the time makes it. The old lady, on the other hand, doesn't always make it. If it's 2 cats and the child, it's a higher likelihood than 2 dogs and the child, and so on.
So and the problem is, obviously, that a machine is making the decision.
The problem is who is making that decision.
Humans make those decisions all the time, and they make them tired, and they often make them drunk. And a car, at least, is more likely to negotiate that really complex decision, I'd suggest.
How?
More safely than a human.
Is there a right answer, though, in the case of that decision? Because someone has to build it in.
Yeah, but I don't... To say that we won't move down that technological path because no one can choose between a 1-year-old and an old lady dying in an accident.
That's somewhat. I said we still need to figure out who will be the one. Is it the guy who programs the car? Is it the insurance company? Or is it me because I can afford a Mercedes and it's always going to save me and, you know, tough with the other people?
Not in the next 10 years, but within a century, yes.
Actually, I disagree. So at the moment, right now in Dubai, they're running trials on drone taxis. So by the end of the year, they want to have people arriving in Dubai and you can get in a drone taxi that flies down a drone corridor and takes you to your hotel. So driverless vehicles that we've seen successfully actually implemented have been in cities that are either built around them, like the ones in China that are being built purely around autonomous vehicles, or areas where you literally only allow the autonomous vehicles to go. I think this is no
and we have those already. We've had them for years. We have them in airports. We have them. Yeah,
they're in my electorate. So. Arthur, to answer your question, there's the perfect overlay of where government needs to get involved for regulation, i.e. you would assume, and this is off the cuff, that if you need to have someone in the car at the moment over 18, so the government would get involved and solve a regulatory issue and the moral and the ethical issues. However, in my electorate right now, Sydney Olympic Park is in my electorate. Right now, is a driverless bus that is being programmed as a trial, and it will launch in the next few months, and it will run shuttles, there will be a fleet of them, around Sydney Olympic Park with no driver. So it's here. But also don't forget, that's called a level 4, they call it. There are different levels. But don't forget along the way the technological improvements that are saving lives today, like the car stopping when you are driving too quick, like it not going out of the lane. You know, all these are steps along the way to the autonomous vehicle that are saving lives along the way because they're integrated into the cars that you're buying today. We're up to level 2. We're on our way to level 4, but there's a lot of work to do from government about the ins and outs before we get there, along with technology coming for the ride. But in mass movement, like shuttles, like trains, like buses, potentially trucks, although somewhat more troublesome, especially in confined living areas like Sydney Olympic Park, it's a very reasonable and soon-to-be delivered solution.
But it won't be necessarily the tech, it's a social licence. It's what goes to the heart of your question, the social licence of having a vehicle that doesn't have someone able or capable at a moment's notice to take over the vehicle to make sure that the 1-year-old in the back is looked after, or that, you know, are we prepared to see in our neighbourhoods driverless trucks going through. This is a question about how people will interact with the tech rather than just letting the tech go on its own. But being very conscious too, that's the knockout stat, 90% of all accidents, there's a human factor involved there, and being able to reduce that element in that way is massive.
Does this person over 18 need some form of driver's licence?
Well, that's the next question.
That's all questions to be considered.
OK, I'm going to leave those questions up in the air for the moment so we can move on to another topic. This question's from Sam Butler.
My question is that recent research by Google's DeepMind project has shown that as AI become more complex and sophisticated, they also become more aggressive. Given that many public intellectuals, such as Stephen Hawking, have warned against the dangers of AI, how should we treat this threat, and if so, how seriously should we treat this threat, and if so, how?
Adam, I'll start with you.
It's a complex one, isn't it? I mean, you've got Hawking on one side, Satya Nadella from, Microsoft on the other side saying it's not an issue, so I'm not going to go up against either of those people. It's a subtle...
Well, you can add Elon Musk to the equation.
Exactly.
He's on Hawking's side.
And Bill Gates seems to change sides depending exactly the nature of the questions being asked. I'm not being cynical when I say that. It's a really complex issue. We are not yet at the point where that's about to happen. This is not something that we don't have a decent...
What is the fear? That AI will become so intelligent it'll decide to use its own power against humans?
Computers can already do some things massively faster than we can, and we could never catch up. But when those systems then become sufficiently subtle that they're making decisions of their own accord and maybe protecting themselves from being stopped, have you created a new intelligence? I think we're a long way off that. My greater concern in this area is not that tomorrow we'll wake up and we're all living in some Will Smith movie. My concern is tomorrow morning we'll wake up and some medium-sized European or American bank will go, where's all the money gone? It's just been taken. Cybercrime, human hacking, human malevolence through technology is a far greater challenge in the foreseeable future for mine than artificial intelligence. It only took a couple of banks going over and your whole GFC kicked off. If hackers got into a bank today and just took everything in a ransomware situation, that's considerably more of a threat to that keeps me awake a lot more than an AI future.
But Hawking, they're jumping further down the track. They want people to think about it now because in the military sphere you already have autonomous AI weapons that actually decide when to kill. So that's already happening. And to think about that down the track, that's what Hawking and Musk are worried about.
Yeah, and they're saying, excuse me, they're saying we have to start thinking about that now. And if we throw our human intellect behind that, walking one-on-one with the technology, a lot of people think that's a future that we can head off. It's not going to be like in those movies where we're all hanging with the robots, everything's going well, one idiot says one nasty thing to one robot, the robot's going, that's it, let's take them out.
But even the World Economic Forum was highlighted this year that is a risk as well. So you've had individuals that are prominent, like Hawking and Musk saying it, the World Economic Forum saying it as well. You know, the concern that has been raised, one example which has been denied hotly by Facebook is where they had AI machines talking to each other and then invented their own language and that wasn't intelligible, understood by humans. It's been denied, by the people that have been involved in that research. But the
teenagers do that all the time.
But the concern was that they were going off and doing this on their own. I actually think
that actually was the Google DeepMind case because they set these computers to learn tasks, to play games, and as they learnt that you could be more aggressive to win the game, they became incredibly more aggressive.
Yeah. And so the issue, I think, is that we do, it's very woolly around the whole, AI, the boundary markers as to, how we'll let it develop and what we'll apply it to. And I think that governments should be stepping forward. And I said, last week, particularly Australia. Australia has got a trusted voice in the world stage. We should put that voice to use and get nations thinking about how AI will be developed, how it will be used, because we shouldn't just let this stuff, as I said before, go along its way and then we scramble for a response.
OK, now Sandra wants to jump in. I can hear you almost breathless.
Am I allowed to say bullshit on national television?
I think you pretty much just did.
I won't. I respectfully disagree. I think.
That's a lot better than bullshit. Yes.
But which part do you disagree with?
Well, most of it, I think. I don't think it's necessarily a woolly problem. Let's try to unpack it. So first is what is AI, and I think that's where a lot of people get stuck on what it can and cannot do. And yes, there is a scenario, in which it will come and kill us all, and I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. But before we get there, there's basically we've had AI since about the 1950s, and we've had two types of AI, right? And there's the common sense problem, which we haven't solved with either of them. First type of AI, come the 1950s, we figure out, well, we could build this thing called, and we name it artificial intelligence so that it's scary, so that we can make the Terminator and the Skynet scenarios that we have today. We make this AI and we decide, OK, how should we teach it? And we say, well, we're going to describe the world to it. And we decide, OK, we're going to describe cats. That's where coding comes from, right? We encode the information that we put into this AI. And we said, well, cats look like this, and they've got whiskers, and they're black and white, and so on. And we got stuck, because every time we show it one of those weird cats that's shaved, it's got no hair and things, it goes, oh, I don't know what that is. So we run into this problem till about the 80s. Until about the 80s, we cannot solve the fact that some of our knowledge is tacit. Some of our knowledge we can't encode. So when we get better at making computers, we figure out, well, there's a new way we can teach AI. We'll just show it, and now we have big data. Now we have 1 million pictures of cats that we took, some with drones that we've labeled. This is a cat and this is a cat. We give it all to the AI and we say, figure out what a cat is. And it says, this is a cat, this is a cat. And it makes up its own rules about what a cat is. And that's pretty much where we are now. Machine learning, deep learning, these neural nets that try to figure out what the rules are around what a cat is. Supervised AI. We can talk about unsupervised and where that's going. But that's where we are. Now, that AI doesn't understand what a cat is, doesn't understand that it's different to a dog, doesn't really care about the cat. And we can teach it to play chess, we can teach it to play Go, we can teach it 1 million interesting things, and we can get it to help us, but it doesn't give a damn. Right? It doesn't give a damn about what it's doing, nor does it have a will, nor does it want to feed cats, or does it care that we're humans and it wants to be better than us. It does what we tell it to do. the robots that started arguing with each other. Yes, that's a new form where we try to teach them by setting them against each other to learn from the negotiation, and that was a negotiation technique. They started talking gibberish. The reason we stopped it is not because they had developed their own language. We wish they did. We really would love to get to the point where they did. But it's because it wasn't making any sense and it wasn't doing what the scientists were hoping to do, which is to learn how to negotiate with each other. So that's why we did shut them down. It's not a big conspiracy.
Okay.
So
we've got to get to another question, but so quickly summarise your point.
Quickly summarize my point, that's not the problem with AI, that they're coming to get us. The real problem with AI is that the second generation has inbuilt bias, things that you get to see glimpses of, and they're funny when they show up and somebody fails the English language test because they spoke Irish, right? Because an artificial intelligence figured out, well, I don't know that accent, so I'm going to do that. Luckily, it wasn't there when I was around. But those sorts of biases, these algorithms, that it's not of our own making. We don't train them to be biased, but they're modeled on the real world. They creep into how we get our loans. They creep into who gets a job, who gets paroled, who gets to go to jail. And that's the real fear with AI, those types of biases that we're building in, and we don't know, and there's no easy way to fix them.
We've got time for just one last question. I'm sorry, I would have loved to explore that in more detail, but the question's from Becky Lovelock.
In his book, Ancient Wisdom, Modern World, the Dalai Lama notes that today we live in closer proximity to each other than ever, but are lonelier than ever, mostly because technology and innovation mean we have no need to rely on each other or the community. Has life truly improved with advances in technology and innovation, or have human relationships been adversely affected, meaning we are less happy?
Catherine, I'll start with you. I suppose you're never lonely if you've got a drone hovering over you. And a baby.
And a baby, yes. I have a really big passion that robotics and AI and this fourth industrial revolution is actually going to allow us to be more human. So we are going to not have to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. We're not going to have to do unpaid overtime anymore. We are going to be able to do a 3-day or a 4-day working week where we can spend some more time with our grandmothers, help our neighbours, get involved in things that actually mean things to us. I actually feel, you know, everyone understands those 2-finger typers that you've worked with, that when they're typing out documents, they use just the 2 fingers. Soon, you know, you can speak and it just beautifully writes documents for you now. I do agree that at the moment we seem to be stuck in this place where we are more hyper-connected and more disconnected than we've ever been before. And I feel that this is a lag phase to where we can go with this technology. But these are the conversations we absolutely need to have. For certain things, for example, like limiting iPad or computer time for younger children, because it's actually been shown to trigger aggressive tendencies. I think this is something we need to learn from. Wearing first-person view goggles and things like that can damage your eyes. It's a bit like my parents used to tell me not to sit too close to the television screen when I was a kid, right? So these things we know and we learn and we need to embrace, but I have a massive, massive passion that AI for good is now a big thing, drones for good is now a big thing. How we take these technologies and make the world a better place is our choice, and it's something that we need to actually actively work on.
Ed, are we happier because of the new technology?
Well, it's, I remember recall seeing a cartoon in the Herald the other day about media concentration, and it was basically everyone looking at their mobile phone. It was a drawing of a whole crowd and everyone's looking individually at their mobile phones while they're standing right next to each other. And that is the concern, that you do see people that, you know, will be spending a lot of time. And in fact, I think it was Twitter's European Vice President recently said we needed to get rid of ourselves from digital enslavement because we'd been spending so much time on devices. You can't blame the tech. It's people's decisions about how they use tech and the way in which they relate to each other. That's at the heart of this. And being able to find ways in which, I see the upside of being able to communicate with one person on the other side of the world. You know, I came from a migrant family where, you know, you had to wait once a month to ring the other side of the planet for 10 minutes and you budgeted that call because it cost so much, and that's all you did. Now you get on Skype, you can do that instantaneously.
And Ed, I must remind you here, you've just taken yourself off Twitter after 19,000 tweets because it's become a bully pulpit.
Well, life has taken on richer meaning. Much more calmer. much more calmer demeanour. But I was just making the point very quickly that it's how people relate to the tech, and I don't think it's necessarily the tech itself.
And we have this rosy view that back in the 50s, everyone just hung out with their neighbours and got on the bus and goes, hi, what's going on? People sat there and read the newspaper. The world, I think, is... My daughters now can go and play with their friends and I don't have to hover over them because they can give me a call and come back.
Well,
if that falls through, they can organise a different thing. The mobility, the liberty that it's given kids is massive. I think it's... We do have to be careful about certain aspects of it, but overwhelmingly it's a positive.
Craig, briefly, because we are out of time.
Becky, you're sort of same age as me, 26, 27. And, you know, 10 years ago, or a little bit longer for both of us, you know, at night I've got a 19-year-old son. You know, if he wants to stay at a mate's house now, you can get a phone call from wherever he is. I mean, it's how you use the technology and incorporate it into your life. It's meant to be, you know, there to make life better quality. But, you know, I think...
You tell that to my son who's lost it now.
Well, I think as parents, you know, here it is. I think we actually have a responsibility, you know, kids sitting at restaurants on phones, you know, to teach them to put them away and actually converse. And, you know, I think there is a social responsibility for parents to make sure that, yes, the technology helps us on one side of the fence, but to make sure we don't lose those traditional family and community skills that have, you know, get out and play sport. You learn as much in life about playing team sport that you do in school.
OK, I'm sorry, but we have to wind it up there. We're out of time. Please thank our panel, Adam Spencer, Craig Laundy, Sandra Peter, Catherine Ball and Ed Husic. Thank you very much. Now, if you've enjoyed tonight's discussion, look out for the ABC's Boyer Lectures, this year delivered by futurist Genevieve Bell. They're all about what it means to be human in a digital world. And you can find the Boyer Lectures wherever you get your podcast. Now, next week, Q&A will be in Melbourne with Greens leader Richard Di Natale, Queensland National Senator, former Minister, maybe he'll be a Minister once again if he can prove he's Australian, Matt Canavan, South Australian Labor MP Amanda Rishworth, CEO of Roy Morgan Research, Michelle Levine, and after a great victory for the Richmond Tigers, we've got their president, Peggy O'Neill. Until next week, good night.
Still got something to say? Join the discussion on Q&A Extra now on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live.